I'll never forget the moment I walked into my 6-year-old son's bedroom and saw the handprint bruised across his swollen face. Leo was curled up in his bed, whimpering in his sleep, and when I gently touched his shoulder to wake him, he flinched so hard he nearly fell off the mattress. His first words weren't "Mom" or "I'm okay." He looked at me with those terrified eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry. I won't wet the bed again. I promise." That was the night everything changed. That was the night I stopped being the obedient daughter and became the mother my son desperately needed. But before I tell you what happened next, if you're enjoying this story, or if you've ever felt trapped in a toxic relationship, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means everything, and I read every single comment. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. Now let me take you back to where it all started, because the truth is, I'd been drowning for years before that night. I grew up as Richard and Eleanor Mitchell's only child, and from the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. My father was a decorated Marine Corps veteran, the kind of man who commanded respect wherever he went. My mother was on every church committee, hosted the most elegant dinner parties, and never had a hair out of place. Our house in the suburbs was immaculate, with a manicured lawn and a white picket fence that practically screamed success. But inside those walls, perfection came at a price I'd been paying my entire life. Richard Mitchell didn't raise a daughter, he trained a soldier. Every mistake was a failure of discipline, every emotion was weakness. When I was 8 years old and cried because I'd fallen off my bike, he made me stand outside in the rain for an hour to toughen up. When I got a B+ on a math test in 5th grade, he took away my books for a month because excuses are for losers. Eleanor never intervened. She'd simply smooth down her dress, adjust her pearl necklace, and remind me that father knew best. I learned early that love in the Mitchell household was conditional. It depended on obedience, achievement, and most importantly, never questioning their authority. By the time I turned 18, I'd become exactly what they wanted. Quiet, compliant, desperate for any scrap of approval. I went to the college they chose, studied the major they approved of, and dated only the boys they deemed worthy. I was so busy trying to be perfect that I forgot to ask myself what I actually wanted. Then I met Marcus during my junior year. He was everything my parents weren't. Warm, spontaneous, full of laughter. He played guitar at a coffee shop on weekends and talked about traveling the world. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. When he looked at me, he didn't see a project to be perfected. He just saw me. We fell in love fast and hard. Maybe too fast. When I got pregnant 6 months into our relationship, I was terrified but also quietly hopeful. Marcus held my hand and promised we'd figure it out together. We got married at City Hall with 2 friends as witnesses. I was so happy I actually forgot to call my parents until the next day. Richard's voice on the phone was ice cold. "You've made your bed, Sarah. Don't come crying to us when this disaster falls apart." Eleanor was worse. She simply said, "You've embarrassed this family," and hung up. They didn't come to meet Leo when he was born. They didn't send a card or a gift. For the first year of my son's life, I convinced myself I didn't need them. Marcus and I were struggling, sure. We lived in a cramped apartment and survived on student loans and his gig money, but we had each other. We had our beautiful boy with his bright eyes and infectious giggle. Then Marcus got sick. It started with headaches he brushed off as stress. Within 3 months, the doctors had diagnosed an aggressive brain tumor. Within 6 months, he was gone. I was 24 years old, a widow with a 2-year-old son, drowning in medical debt and grief so heavy I could barely get out of bed in the morning. That's when my parents reappeared. Richard showed up at my apartment door in his perfectly pressed suit, Eleanor beside him with her practiced smile of concern. "We've come to help," he announced, as if the past 2 years hadn't happened. "You can't raise a child alone in these conditions. Pack your things. You're coming home." I should have been suspicious of their sudden change of heart. I should have questioned why people who'd abandoned me during my pregnancy suddenly wanted to play grandparents. But I was so tired, so scared, so desperate for any kind of support that I ignored every warning sign. Moving back into my childhood home felt like stepping into a time machine. Nothing had changed. The same rigid schedules, the same suffocating rules, the same expectation of absolute obedience. But now they had Leo to mold too. At first, they seemed genuinely helpful. Eleanor watched Leo while I worked double shifts at an upscale restaurant downtown, trying to chip away at the mountain of debt Marcus had left behind. Richard paid for groceries and covered some of the medical bills. I was so grateful I didn't notice what was really happening. They were buying control. Every time I tried to make a decision about Leo's upbringing, they overruled me. When I said he was too young for strict discipline, Richard would scoff and say, "That's why he needs a man's influence. You're too soft." When I wanted to let him sleep in on weekends, Eleanor would wake him at dawn for her idea of proper breakfast etiquette. Children need structure, Sarah. You're raising him to be lazy. But I needed their help. I needed the roof over our heads and the food on the table. So I bit my tongue and told myself they meant well. I told myself that surely grandparents had the right to be involved. I told myself that maybe they were right. Maybe I was too soft. Maybe I didn't know what I was doing. The debt collectors kept calling. Every month I'd sit at the kitchen table with bills spread out in front of me, trying to figure out how to make the numbers work. They never did. Marcus's final hospital stay alone had cost more than I'd make in 3 years. The credit cards I'd maxed out buying his medications and paying for experimental treatments were now drowning me in interest. My parents watched this struggle with thinly veiled satisfaction. One night, about a year after I'd moved back, Richard sat down across from me as I juggled payment plans. "You know," he said casually, "we could help more. We could pay off a significant chunk of this debt." Hope flared in my chest. "Really, Dad? That would be—" "On one condition." His eyes were hard. "We'd need you to sign over partial custody of Leo. Legal guardianship. Just a formality to protect our investment." The hope died. "Investment? We're putting money into raising him, Sarah. We deserve legal recognition of our role in his life. It's only fair." Eleanor nodded from her armchair, not even looking up from her knitting. "After all, dear, you wouldn't want us to think you're ungrateful. We've given you so much." I didn't sign the papers. That was one line I couldn't cross. But my refusal came with a price. The help became conditional. They started keeping a ledger of every dollar spent on groceries, every utility bill, every tank of gas for the car they let me use. They'd remind me constantly of my debt, both financial and familial. And slowly, insidiously, they turned their attention fully to Leo. My son was 4 years old when I first noticed the change in him. He'd been such a happy baby, always laughing and playing. But gradually, he became quiet, withdrawn. He started flinching when Richard raised his voice. He'd burst into tears over tiny mistakes. When I asked him what was wrong, he'd just shake his head and say he needed to be better. I confronted my parents about their harsh discipline. Richard's response was swift and brutal. "The boy needs a firm hand. His father was weak, and look what happened to him. Do you want Leo to grow up to be another failure?" "Marcus wasn't a failure," I said, my voice shaking. "He was kind and loving and dead," Eleanor cut in coldly. "Dead and in debt, leaving you and that child with nothing. Is that the example you want Leo to follow?" I tried to stand my ground. I tried to set boundaries. But every time I pushed back, they'd threaten to kick us out. And where would we go? I was barely keeping my head above water as it was. The debt wasn't getting any smaller. I was working 60-hour weeks and still couldn't afford a security deposit on an apartment. So I stayed. I stayed and watched my son slowly lose his light. By the time Leo turned 6, he'd stopped laughing altogether. He was having nightmares 3 or 4 times a week, waking up screaming. He started wetting the bed, something he hadn't done since he was 3. Every morning, I'd find him awake before dawn, frantically trying to wash his sheets before Richard and Eleanor found out. "Why are you so scared, baby?" I asked him one morning, holding him while he cried. "Grandpa says big boys don't have accidents. He says if I'm not careful, he'll send me away like he sent Daddy away." My blood ran cold. "Sent Daddy away? Leo, what do you mean?" But he just shook his head, too frightened to say more. I should have left then. God, I should have packed our bags that very moment. But I was trapped in the same prison of fear and obligation that had held me my entire life. I convinced myself that it wasn't that bad, that my parents were just old-fashioned, that I was overreacting. My friend Jessica tried to talk sense into me. We'd met at the restaurant where I worked, and she was the only person who really understood what I was going through. Over coffee one afternoon, while Leo was at school, she looked at me seriously and said, "Sarah, you need to document what's happening. Take pictures if there are any marks. Record conversations if you can. Because, honey, this isn't normal grandparent behavior. This is control and abuse." "They're not abusing him," I protested weakly. "They're just strict. He's 6 years old and having panic attacks." Jessica grabbed my hand. "That's not strict. That's traumatizing. You know this. I can see it in your eyes." I did know it. Deep down, beneath all the justifications and denial, I knew my parents were hurting my son. But knowing and having the courage to act are two different things. The financial chains were real. The psychological ones were even stronger. Then came that shift at work, 3 months before everything exploded. It was a Friday night, and the restaurant was slammed. I was supposed to get off at 10, but we were so understaffed that I ended up staying until 2 in the morning. By the time I got home, I was dead on my feet. The house was dark and quiet. Too quiet. I dropped my purse on the kitchen counter and headed upstairs to check on Leo. His bedroom door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open softly, not wanting to wake him. The streetlight outside cast just enough glow through the window for me to see him curled up in bed. And then I saw his face. The bruise was massive, covering most of his left cheek. The swelling made his eye nearly shut. And there, clear as day in the dim light, were 4 distinct finger marks and a thumbprint. Someone had slapped my baby hard enough to leave their handprint on his face. I couldn't breathe. The room spun. I stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, just staring at my son's injured face while he whimpered in his sleep. Then, instinct took over. I moved to his bedside and gently touched his shoulder. "Leo? Sweetheart, wake up." He jerked awake with a gasp, arms flying up to protect his face. His eyes were wide with terror before he even focused on me. When he finally recognized me, instead of relief, I saw shame flood his features. "I'm sorry," he whispered immediately, his voice raw from crying. "I'm sorry, Mommy. I won't wet the bed again. I promise I'll be good. Please don't let Grandpa." "Shh, baby, it's okay." I was crying now, tears streaming down my face as I carefully gathered him into my arms. He was trembling all over. "You didn't do anything wrong. You're not in trouble. I promise." "But Grandpa said," his voice broke into sobs. "What did Grandpa say?" I forced myself to stay calm even though rage was building in my chest like a tsunami. "He said I'm disgusting. He said boys who wet the bed are babies, and babies get punished. Grandma said I was embarrassing the family." Leo's thin arms wrapped around my neck, holding on like I was the only solid thing in his world. "I tried to be good, Mommy. I really tried." The room went red. In that moment, something inside me that had been bending for years finally snapped. I picked Leo up, blankets and all, and carried him downstairs. Richard and Eleanor were in the living room, watching some late-night news program. They didn't even look up when I entered. "Who did this to my son?" My voice came out steady despite the shaking in my hands. Richard finally glanced over, barely interested. "Did what?" "This." I shifted Leo so they could see his battered face. "Who hit my child hard enough to leave a handprint bruise?" Eleanor set down her tea with a delicate clink. "Oh, that. He had an accident during dinner, made a mess all over himself and cried about it. The boy needed discipline." "Discipline?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You hit a 6-year-old child in the face hard enough to bruise him because he had an accident?" "He needs to learn consequences." Richard's voice was matter-of-fact, like we were discussing the weather. "You coddle him too much. Real men don't cry and piss themselves. I'm teaching him to be strong." "He's 6 years old," I repeated, my voice rising. "He's a little boy who lost his father. He's traumatized and scared, and you're making it worse." Richard stood up then, using his full height and military bearing to loom over me. I'd seen this move 1,000 times growing up. It was meant to intimidate, to make me back down. "I made you, Sarah. I raised you from nothing. Everything you are is because of me. And now I'm doing the same for him. This is my house, and in my house, we do things my way." He took a step closer, and I instinctively pulled Leo tighter against me. Richard's hand raised, not to strike but to point, but it was enough. It was the same threatening gesture he'd used throughout my childhood, the unspoken promise of violence if I didn't comply. "Don't you dare," I heard myself say. "Don't you dare touch either of us again." Eleanor's laugh was brittle. "Oh, Sarah, always so dramatic. We're helping you raise him properly. You should be thanking us, not making a scene. What would you do without us? Where would you go? You're nothing without this family." Something crystallized in that moment. All the years of manipulation, all the conditional love, all the ways they'd ground me down until I didn't recognize myself anymore. I saw it all clearly for the first time. "We're leaving," I said. "Excuse me?" Richard's eyebrows shot up. "We're leaving. Tonight. Right now." "Don't be ridiculous." Eleanor's voice sharpened. "Where exactly do you think you're going at 3 in the morning with no money and nowhere to stay? You'll come crawling back by morning, and then we'll discuss your attitude." But I was already moving toward the stairs. "Leo, hold on to Mommy, okay?" They didn't try to stop me physically. I think they genuinely didn't believe I'd go through with it. I ran up to my room and threw essentials into a duffel bag with shaking hands. Clothes for both of us, Leo's favorite stuffed elephant, toiletries, my phone charger. I grabbed the small metal box from the back of my closet where I'd been hiding tip money, my emergency stash. It wasn't much, maybe $300, but it was something. Leo clung to me the entire time, silent tears streaming down his uninjured cheek. Are we really leaving, Mommy? Yes, baby, we're really leaving. Will they come after us? The question hit me like a punch. What kind of life had we been living that my 6-year-old son was afraid his grandparents would hunt us down? No, sweetheart, I won't let them hurt you ever again. I carried him out through the kitchen, avoiding the living room where I could hear Richard and Eleanor talking in low, angry voices. My old car was parked in the driveway. I buckled Leo into his booster seat, threw our bag in the trunk, and got behind the wheel. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine turned over, and I backed out of that driveway like my life depended on it, because maybe it did. Mommy? Leo's voice was small from the back seat. Are Grandma and Grandpa going to chase us? I looked in the rearview mirror. The house was still lit up, but no one had come out. No one was following. No, baby, we're safe now. I drove with no destination, tears blurring my vision as adrenaline and shock coursed through my system. It was 4 a.m. on a Saturday. Where could I even go? Every hotel would want a credit card I didn't have. I couldn't show up at Jessica's at this hour without warning. Jessica. Oh God, Jessica. I pulled into a 24-hour gas station parking lot and fumbled for my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it twice. Jessica answered on the third ring, her voice groggy and confused. Sarah? What's wrong? It's 4 a.m. And then I couldn't hold it together anymore. The words came tumbling out in a panic-stricken rush. Jess, they hit him. They hit Leo so hard they left a handprint bruise on his face. I found him crying in bed and he was terrified and I just grabbed him and left. We're sitting in a gas station parking lot and I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. I'm so scared. Oh my God. Jessica was instantly alert. Okay, listen to me. Don't move. Text me your location right now. I'm coming to get you. Jess, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm telling. Send me your location. I'll be there in 20 minutes. We're going to figure this out. She hung up before I could argue. I sent her the address and then just sat there in the parking lot, watching Leo sleep fitfully in the back seat. Even in sleep, he looked anxious. His small face was turned to the side where the bruise wasn't as visible, but I could still see the swelling. How had I let it get this bad? How had I convinced myself that their treatment of him was just strict parenting when it was clearly abuse? The guilt threatened to swallow me whole. Jessica arrived exactly 20 minutes later, her beat-up Honda pulling in next to my car. She took one look at me and pulled me into a fierce hug. You did the right thing, Sarah. You got him out. That's what matters now. But what do? I have nowhere to go. I have $300 to my name. They're going to call the police, aren't they? They're going to say I kidnapped him, or that I'm unstable, or... Stop. Jessica held me at arm's length, looking me dead in the eyes. Take a breath. We're going to handle this the right way. First, you're going to follow me to my apartment. You and Leo are going to sleep for a few hours. Then, the moment the sun comes up, we're going to the police station. The police? Fear shot through me. What if they don't believe me? What if... Sarah, your son has a massive bruise in the shape of a hand on his face. He has evidence of ongoing trauma. You're not the one who should be afraid of the police. They are. She squeezed my shoulders. But we need to get ahead of this. If your parents are as controlling as you've told me, they're going to try to spin this their way. We need to make sure your version is on record first. She was right. I knew she was right. I nodded numbly and got back in my car to follow her across town to her apartment. The sun was just starting to rise when we pulled into her complex. Jessica helped me carry Leo inside. He barely stirred, exhausted from crying and fear. She set us up in her guest room, which was really more of an office with a futon, but it felt like a 5-star hotel compared to the prison I'd just escaped. Try to get some sleep, Jessica said softly. I'll be right outside if you need anything. But I couldn't sleep. I lay there with Leo curled against me, watching his chest rise and fall, memorizing the feel of him safe in my arms. Every car that passed outside made my heart race. Every sound in the apartment building sent panic shooting through me. Around 8 a.m, my phone started ringing. Richard. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. Eleanor this time. I turned the phone on silent and watched the missed calls pile up. 5, 10, 15. Jessica knocked softly on the door around 9. Sarah? The police station opens at 10. We should probably get ready. Right. The police. I felt sick to my stomach but forced myself to get up. Leo was still sleeping, so I let him rest while I took the quickest shower of my life, terrified to be away from him even for 5 minutes. When I came out, Jessica had made coffee and toast. The smell made my stomach turn, but I forced myself to eat a few bites. I needed to keep my strength up. Do you think they'll believe me? I asked quietly. Let's look at the facts, Jessica said, sliding into lawyer mode. I'd almost forgotten she'd gone to law school before deciding she preferred restaurant management. You have a 6-year-old child with visible injuries. You have a history of your parents being controlling. You left in the middle of the night because you feared for your child's safety. That's not kidnapping, Sarah. That's protecting your son. Leo woke up around 9:30, groggy and disoriented. When he saw the strange room, panic flashed across his face until he spotted me. Mommy? I'm right here, baby. We're at Aunt Jessica's house, remember? We're safe. Are we going back? The fear in his voice broke my heart. No, sweetheart. We're not going back there. Jessica drove us to the police station because my hands were still shaking too badly to be safe behind the wheel. The building was intimidating, all gray concrete and official looking. Leo held my hand so tightly I could feel my fingers going numb. Inside, a bored-looking receptionist asked how she could help us. Before I could speak, Jessica jumped in. We need to report child abuse and file for an emergency protective order. The receptionist's demeanor changed instantly. Within minutes, we were ushered into a small interview room where a police officer named Davis joined us. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes that immediately went to Leo's bruised face. Ma'am, can you tell me what happened? I told him everything. The words tumbled out in a rush. Years of emotional abuse and control, the escalating treatment of Leo, finding him last night with the handprint bruise, their casual admission that they'd hit him for having an accident. Officer Davis listened carefully, taking notes, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. And they admitted to striking him? Yes. They said he needed discipline. They weren't even sorry. They acted like I was overreacting. Officer Davis turned his attention to Leo, who was sitting in my lap, still clinging to me. Hey there, buddy. I'm Officer Davis. Is it okay if I ask you a couple of questions? Leo looked at me for permission. I nodded encouragingly. It's okay, sweetheart. Just tell him the truth. Does your face hurt? Officer Davis asked gently. Leo nodded, touching the bruise carefully. Grandpa hit me. Can you tell me why? Leo's voice dropped to a whisper. I had an accident at dinner. I spilled my water and my food got wet and I cried. Grandpa said crying is for babies. He hit me and told me to go to my room. Has Grandpa hit you before? Leo nodded again. Sometimes, when I'm bad. What about Grandma? She hits too, but mostly she yells. She says I'm embarrassing. His chin trembled. Am I in trouble? No, son. You're not in trouble at all. You were very brave to tell me the truth. Officer Davis looked back at me, and I could see anger simmering beneath his professional calm. Ma'am, I'm going to open an official investigation into this matter. I need to take photos of Leo's injuries for evidence. And I want to get him examined by our department pediatrician today if possible. Of course, whatever you need. I also want you to know that you did the right thing by leaving and coming here. Based on what you've told me and what I can see, I'm going to file for an emergency protective order immediately. Your parents will be ordered to have no contact with you or your son pending the investigation. Relief hit me so hard I started crying again. Thank you. Thank you so much. Jessica spoke up. Officer, there's something else you should know. Sarah's parents called her phone repeatedly this morning, 15 times at least. They haven't left voicemails, but I'm concerned they might try to file a false report claiming she kidnapped Leo. Officer Davis frowned. Do you have her phone? I handed it over. He looked at the call log and nodded. I'm going to note this in the report. And actually, it might be good if they do try to file a false report. It'll establish a pattern of manipulation. In the meantime, I'd suggest not answering their calls. Let everything go through official channels from now on. The department pediatrician, Dr. Chen, was a gentle woman in her 50s who examined Leo with infinite patience. She documented the facial bruising, the finger marks that were still clearly visible, and also found older bruises on his arms and back that I hadn't even known about. Each new discovery felt like a knife to my heart. These bruises are in various stages of healing, doctor. Chen told me quietly while Leo played with some toys in the corner of the exam room. This suggests ongoing physical abuse, not a single incident. I'm legally required to report this to Child Protective Services. I understand, I said, even though the words Child Protective Services sent terror through me. What if they thought I was at fault too? What if they tried to take Leo away? Dr. Chen seemed to read my mind. Miss Mitchell, you removed your son from a dangerous situation the moment you became fully aware of it. That's good parenting. CPS will want to talk to you, but you're not the one under investigation here. The CPS caseworker, a tired-looking woman named Rita, arrived within the hour. She interviewed me separately from Leo, asking detailed questions about our living situation, my parents' behavior, why I hadn't left sooner. I answered as honestly as I could, even when the answers made me look naive or weak. Why did you stay so long if you suspected abuse? Rita asked, not unkindly but directly. Because I was drowning, I admitted. I'm $50,000 in debt from my late husband's medical bills. I was working 60 hours a week and still couldn't afford rent anywhere. My parents offered help, and I was desperate enough to take it. And I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad, that I was overreacting, that they just had old-fashioned ideas about discipline. I looked her in the eye. I was wrong. I should have left sooner. I should have protected him better. But I'm protecting him now. Rita made notes in her file. Miss Mitchell, I'm going to be honest with you. This case is clear-cut. Your son shows obvious signs of physical and emotional abuse. You took appropriate action to remove him from danger. My recommendation is going to be that Leo remains in your custody with supervised distance from his grandparents. However, you're going to need to demonstrate you can provide a safe, stable environment for him. I will. I'll do whatever it takes. That might mean finding new housing, possibly relocating away from your parents' influence, continuing therapy for Leo. She paused. I see here you're currently staying with a friend. Is that sustainable? For as long as they need, Jessica said firmly from where she'd been sitting quietly in the corner. I've already told Sarah she and Leo can stay with me. By the time we left the police station that evening, I was emotionally and physically exhausted, but I also felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. The protective order had been filed. The investigation was official. Leo's injuries were documented. For the first time, I had proof that I wasn't crazy, that the way my parents treated us wasn't normal or acceptable. That night, after Leo fell asleep on Jessica's futon, I finally listened to one of the voicemails my parents had left. It was from Richard, and his voice was ice cold. Sarah, you're making a huge mistake. You come back to this house right now with our grandson, or you'll regret it. We'll tell the police you're unstable. We'll tell them about your depression after Marcus died. We'll tell them you're an unfit mother. You have no money, no home, no prospects. You need us, and you know it. Stop this ridiculous tantrum and come home before you ruin everything. I deleted the message and blocked their numbers. The next few days were a blur of meetings and paperwork. CPS wanted multiple interviews with Leo, conducted by a child psychologist named Dr. Amanda Martinez. I sat in the waiting room during these sessions, my anxiety through the roof, terrified of what Leo might say or how he might be interpreted. But Dr. Martinez turned out to be our unexpected ally. After her third session with Leo, she called me into her office with a serious expression. Miss Mitchell, I need you to understand something. Your son has been living in a state of chronic fear and stress. The things he's described to me go beyond just that one slap you witnessed. My stomach dropped. What did he tell you? She pulled out a series of drawings Leo had made. Children often communicate trauma through art when they can't find the words. These pictures show a consistent pattern of psychological abuse. Being locked in dark rooms as punishment. Being deprived of food for minor misbehavior. Being told he was the reason his father died. She looked at me with compassion. Sarah, your son believes that if he's not perfect, terrible things will happen. He's been living in survival mode. I couldn't stop the tears. I knew they were too strict, but I didn't know it was that bad. He never told me about being locked up or starved. Because he was afraid to. They'd conditioned him to believe that telling you would make things worse. Dr. Martinez handed me a tissue. But here's what I want you to focus on. Leo is incredibly resilient. He's already starting to open up. The nightmares have reduced since he's been staying with you at your friend's place. He smiled during our last session. With proper therapy and a safe environment, he's going to be okay. How long will therapy take? That's hard to say. Healing isn't linear. But Sarah, The fact that you got him out when you did, that you took him seriously and protected him, that's going to make all the difference in his recovery. Meanwhile, Officer Davis had been building the case. He'd gone to my parents' house with the protective order. According to his report, Richard had been outraged, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, that I was mentally unstable and making things up. Eleanor had cried and played the victim, claiming they were just trying to help their troubled daughter. But then Officer Davis had asked to see Leo's room, and they'd made a critical mistake. They'd let him. He found Leo's sheets and mattress, still stained from accidents, hidden in the garage. He found a lock on the outside of the bedroom door. And he found, tucked in the back of Eleanor's pristine linen closet, a wooden paddle with Leo's name written on it in Sharpie. When confronted with these items, my parents had insisted it was normal discipline. That had been enough for Officer Davis to make an arrest for child abuse. Jessica showed me the news article a week later. My parents, Richard and Eleanor Mitchell, respected members of the community, arrested on charges of child abuse. The story was vague on details due to Leo being a minor, but the damage to their reputation was instant and devastating. Then came the phone call from Jessica that changed everything. She'd been doing some cleaning in Leo's room at my parents' house, gathering the rest of his belongings, when she'd noticed the smoke detector. Something about it looked off. On a hunch, she'd unscrewed it. Inside was a small hidden camera with a memory card. "Sarah," she said, her voice shaking, "I think you might have installed this and forgotten about it. Do you remember ever putting a camera in his room?" I did. When Leo was 3 and recovering from a bad flu, I'd installed a nanny cam to check on him while I was at work. It was hidden in the smoke detector, and I'd honestly forgotten it was there after he got better. Oh my God, Jess. Does it still have footage on it? I don't know, but we need to find out. I'm bringing it to you right now. An hour later, we sat huddled around Jessica's laptop, the memory card inserted. The camera had been set to motion activation to save battery and storage. The earliest footage was from 2 months ago. What we saw made me physically ill. The first clip showed Eleanor entering Leo's room in the middle of the night. He was fast asleep. She yanked the blankets off, grabbed him by the arm hard enough to leave marks, and dragged him out of bed while he cried and begged her to stop. Her voice was venomous. "You disgusting little brat. You wet the bed again. What is wrong with you?" The second clip was even worse. Richard stood over Leo, who was cowering on the floor. "Stand up like a man. Stop that sniveling." When Leo couldn't stop crying, Richard slapped him across the face. Not once, but 3 times. I said stop. Leo choked on his sobs, trying desperately to obey, his little body shaking with the effort of staying quiet. There were more, so many more. Eleanor locking Leo in his room from the outside for hours. Richard force-feeding him spoiled food as punishment for not finishing his dinner. Both of them standing over him, berating him with words no child should ever hear. Worthless. Mistake. Should have never been born. Your father was weak and you're just like him. I watched through tears as my son endured horrors I hadn't imagined, right under my roof, while I worked myself to exhaustion trying to provide for him. The guilt was crushing, but beneath it was a white-hot rage unlike anything I'd ever felt. "We have to give this to the police," Jessica said quietly. "Sarah, this is evidence. This is proof." "I know." My voice came out hollow. "I just can't believe I didn't know. I lived in that house. How did I not know?" "Because they were careful. They waited until you were gone. They trained Leo not to tell you." Jessica grabbed my hand. "But now we have proof. Now they can't lie their way out of this." Officer Davis's reaction to the footage was immediate and intense. I watched the color drain from his face as he viewed clip after clip. When it was over, he sat back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. "Miss Mitchell, this is some of the most clear-cut evidence of child abuse I've seen in my 15 years on the force. With this, the DA is going to push for serious charges." "What kind of charges?" I asked. "Aggravated child abuse, assault and battery of a minor, child endangerment, possibly more. Your parents are looking at prison time if convicted." He paused. "Are you prepared for what's going to happen when this goes to trial? The defense will try to discredit you. They'll bring up your financial situation, your late husband's medical issues, anything they can use to paint you as an unfit mother who's trying to blame them." "I don't care what they do to me," I said firmly. "As long as Leo is safe and they can never hurt him again, I don't care." But I should have prepared myself better for what came next. 2 weeks after we turned over the video evidence, my parents hired a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but Marcus Bradley, one of the most expensive and notorious defense attorneys in the state. How they could afford him, I had no idea. Maybe they'd mortgaged their precious perfect house. Bradley immediately went on the offensive. He filed a motion for grandparents' rights, claiming that I was an unstable mother who was alienating Leo from his loving grandparents. He requested a full psychiatric evaluation of me. He demanded access to all my medical records, including my treatment for depression after Marcus died. Then he called Pastor John from our church, the man who'd baptized Leo, and convinced him to serve as a character witness for my parents. Pastor John had known Richard and Eleanor for 30 years. He'd married them, counseled them, prayed with them weekly. He believed they were good Christian people who couldn't possibly be capable of abuse. The custody hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, I had to undergo the psychiatric evaluation Bradley had demanded. The psychiatrist, Dr. Patterson, spent 3 hours asking me invasive questions about my marriage, Marcus's death, my relationship with my parents, my finances, my parenting decisions. "Do you have any history of anger issues?" he asked, no more than any normal person. "Have you ever had thoughts of harming yourself or others?" "I had suicidal thoughts after my husband died. I went to therapy. I got help." "Are you currently taking any psychiatric medications?" "No. My therapist and I agreed I didn't need them anymore." Every answer felt like a trap. Every question seemed designed to make me look unstable. I left that evaluation feeling like I'd failed, like I'd given them ammunition to use against me. Jessica tried to reassure me. "Sarah, you were honest. That's all you can do. And you have the video evidence. That's going to speak louder than any psychiatric evaluation." She was right, but the waiting was agony. 6 weeks felt like 6 years. Every day I expected to hear that somehow my parents had won, that I was losing Leo, that the system had failed us. During those weeks, my parents didn't stay quiet. They went to Pastor John and the church leadership with a carefully crafted story. They claimed I'd always been troubled, that Marcus had been a bad influence, that they'd only been trying to help raise Leo properly because I was incapable. They painted themselves as martyrs, sacrificing to support their broken daughter. The church community divided. Some people believed my parents completely. After all, Richard and Eleanor Mitchell had been pillars of that church for decades. They taught Sunday school. They organized charity drives. They were always the first to volunteer, always smiling and gracious. But others had seen the cracks in the facade over the years. They remembered how controlled I'd been as a teenager. They remembered how cold my parents had been when Marcus died. And they'd seen how quiet and fearful Leo had become. Jessica's lawyer friend, Maria, agreed to represent me pro bono at the custody hearing. She was a firebrand in her mid-40s who specialized in family law and had a particular passion for protecting abuse victims. When I told her I couldn't afford her rates, she waved me off. "Sarah, I've seen that video footage. I'm not letting those monsters anywhere near that little boy. We're going to bury them." The day of the custody hearing arrived. I dressed in my most conservative outfit, pulled my hair back, and tried to look stable and competent. Leo stayed with Jessica's sister for the day. I couldn't bear the thought of him having to be in the same room as his abusers. The courthouse was cold and intimidating. My parents arrived with Marcus Bradley, both of them dressed impeccably. Eleanor wore a tasteful dress and pearls. Richard had on his best suit with his military pins on the lapel. They looked exactly like what they'd always tried to be, respectable, upstanding citizens. They didn't even glance at me as they took their seats. Pastor John was there too, sitting in the gallery to show his support for them. The sight of him made my stomach turn. How could a man of God defend child abusers? The hearing began with Bradley presenting his case. He painted a picture of 2 devoted grandparents who had opened their home to their struggling daughter and grandson, only to be repaid with false accusations and estrangement. He called Pastor John to the stand first. "How long have you known Richard and Eleanor Mitchell?" Bradley asked. 32 years. They were among the first families I met when I came to this parish. And in all that time, have you ever seen any indication that they would be capable of harming a child? Absolutely not. They're devout Christians, active in the community, always willing to help others. When Sarah was going through her troubles, they stepped up without hesitation. They're good people. What about Sarah? How would you characterize her mental state? Pastor John hesitated, looking uncomfortable. Sarah has been through a lot. Losing her husband was devastating. I'm concerned that her grief and stress may have affected her judgment. Maria stood for cross-examination. Pastor John, when was the last time you actually spent time with Leo Mitchell? I'm not sure. A few months ago, perhaps. Did you notice anything about his demeanor? He seemed like a normal boy. Really? Because multiple witnesses have testified that Leo appeared withdrawn, fearful, and anxious in the months before his mother removed him from his grandparents' care. You didn't notice that? Children go through phases. So you're saying it's normal for a 6-year-old to be afraid of his grandparents? I didn't say that. But you're willing to testify on behalf of people who abused him without ever really observing their interactions with him? Bradley objected, and the judge sustained it, but the point had been made. Pastor John's testimony was based on image, not reality. Next, Bradley called Eleanor to the stand. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as she took the oath. Mrs. Mitchell, can you describe your relationship with your grandson? I love Leo more than anything, she said, her voice breaking perfectly. We took him and Sarah in when they had nowhere else to go. We gave them a home, supported them financially, tried to help raise Leo to be a good boy. And Sarah has accused you of physically abusing Leo. How do you respond to that? It's not true. Yes, we believe in discipline. We come from a generation where children were expected to behave, but we never, ever abused that child. Sarah has always been dramatic. Ever since she was young, she sees abuse where there's only structure. What about the bruising that was documented on Leo? Children get bruises. They play, they fall. Leo is an active boy. I can't explain every bump and scrape. It was such a smooth performance. If I hadn't known the truth, if I hadn't seen the video, I might have almost believed her myself. She was that convincing. Then Maria stood up for cross-examination, and I saw Eleanor's confident expression falter slightly. Mrs. Mitchell, you say children get bruises from playing. Can you explain how a child gets 4 finger marks and a thumbprint on his face from playing? I don't know, perhaps he fell. Fell onto someone's hand that was shaped exactly like an adult's? I don't appreciate your tone. I'm sure you don't. Let me ask you something else. Did you install a lock on the outside of Leo's bedroom door? Eleanor's eyes widened fractionally. We needed to make sure he stayed in his room at night for his own safety. You locked a 6-year-old child in his room from the outside? For his safety, yes. What about the paddle with his name on it that was found in your home? Was that for his safety too? That's an old-fashioned discipline tool. Spare the rod, spoil the child. So you admit to hitting him with a paddle? I'm saying we believe in biblical discipline. Maria moved to a laptop set up at the prosecution table. Your Honor, I'd like to play some video evidence for the court. Bradley jumped up. Objection. We haven't been provided with any video evidence. It was provided to the DA's office 2 weeks ago as part of the criminal investigation, Maria said smoothly, and it was included in our evidence filing for this hearing. If you didn't review it, that's your oversight. The judge looked irritated. Overruled. Proceed. The lights dimmed, and the courtroom screen lit up with footage from Leo's room. There was no audio on some clips, but the images spoke for themselves. Eleanor dragging Leo from bed. Richard's hand connecting with Leo's face, both of them looming over the terrified child. I watched my mother's face as she saw herself on screen. The color drained away. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. Richard sat stone still, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. The courtroom was silent, except for the sounds of Leo's muffled cries coming from the speakers. When the final clip ended, Maria turned to Eleanor, who was still on the stand. Mrs. Mitchell, you said you never abused Leo. Would you like to revise that statement? Eleanor couldn't speak. She just stared at the screen, then at the judge, then at her hands. No further questions, Maria said. Richard took the stand next, and he tried a different approach. He went on the offensive. Yes, I disciplined the boy, he said when Bradley prompted him, because he needed it. His mother was too soft. The child was out of control, crying all the time, having accidents, refusing to behave. Someone had to teach him to be a man. And you felt that physical discipline was appropriate? Bradley asked, trying to regain control of the narrative. I was raised with physical discipline. It made me who I am. I served my country for 20 years. I know what it takes to build character. But Maria tore that argument apart on cross-examination. Mr. Mitchell, you say you disciplined Leo to build his character. Can you point to any child development research that supports hitting a 6-year-old hard enough to leave bruises? I don't need research. I have experience. Experience abusing children? Experience raising responsible adults. Really? Because your daughter is sitting right there, and she's testified that your discipline left her terrified and desperate for approval her entire life. Is that your definition of success? Richard's face flushed red. My daughter was fine until she married that weak man who filled her head with nonsense. Weak man? You mean her deceased husband who she loved? I mean the man who died and left her in debt with a child to raise. That's weakness. So, let me get this straight. You blame Sarah's late husband for dying of cancer. You blame your grandson for being a normal, traumatized child. But you take no responsibility for your own actions? I did what needed to be done. You beat a 6-year-old child, Mr. Mitchell. You locked him in dark rooms. You called him worthless. You told him his father was weak and he was a mistake. That's not discipline. That's torture. Richard stood up in the witness box, his military bearing on full display. That boy needed a firm hand and I gave it to him. If his mother wasn't so incompetent, we wouldn't have had to intervene. The judge's gavel came down hard. Mr. Mitchell, sit down and control yourself, or I will hold you in contempt. Richard sat, but the damage was done. The jury, if there had been one, would have seen exactly who he was. A controlling, violent man who believed his way was the only way. The final witness was Dr. Martinez, Leo's therapist. She testified about the extent of Leo's trauma, the nightmares, the regression, the fear responses. She played audio of one of their sessions where Leo described being locked in a closet for wetting the bed. In my professional opinion, Dr. Martinez said, Leo Mitchell was living in a state of chronic abuse that was causing severe psychological damage. His removal from his grandparents' care likely saved him from developing PTSD and other long-term mental health issues. When all the testimony was done, the judge took a recess to review the evidence. Those 30 minutes felt like an eternity. I sat in the hallway with Maria and Jessica, trying not to throw up from anxiety. Finally, we were called back in. The judge looked at my parents with barely concealed disgust. I've reviewed all the evidence presented today, including the video footage. I've listened to the testimony of the experts and the witnesses, and I have to say, in my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a clear-cut case of child abuse masked as discipline. Eleanor started crying. Real tears this time, tears of fear rather than manipulation. The petition for grandparents' rights is denied. Furthermore, I am issuing a permanent restraining order. Richard and Eleanor Mitchell are prohibited from any contact with Leo Mitchell, direct or indirect, for a minimum of 5 years. At that time, Leo, with appropriate therapeutic support, may choose whether he wishes to have any relationship with his grandparents. That choice will be his and his alone. Your Honor, Bradley began, but the judge cut him off. I'm not finished. The video evidence shown here today is being forwarded to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. I recommend charges of aggravated child abuse, assault and battery of a minor, and child endangerment. Bailiff, please escort Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell into custody pending arraignment. The courtroom erupted. Eleanor was sobbing openly now. Richard tried to maintain his composure, but I could see the panic in his eyes as the bailiff approached with handcuffs. Pastor John stood up in the gallery, his face pale. Your Honor, surely there's been a misunderstanding. These are good people. Sit down, sir, or you'll be removed from my courtroom, the judge snapped. Good people don't torture children. I watched as my parents were led away in handcuffs. Eleanor kept trying to turn back to look at me, but I wouldn't meet her eyes. Richard walked with his head up, still trying to project dignity even as his perfect world crumbled around him. Outside the courthouse, Maria hugged me fiercely. You did it. Leo is safe. I couldn't even process it yet. After months of fear and uncertainty, it was really over. My parents couldn't hurt us anymore. The fallout was swift and brutal. News of the video evidence leaked, as these things always do. It spread through our community like wildfire. The couple who'd been the picture of respectability were revealed as child abusers, and the public reaction was savage. Richard was stripped of his membership in the Veterans of Foreign Wars and the American Legion. 30 years of service and respect, gone overnight. Eleanor was removed from every church committee she'd ever served on. The Bible study group she'd led for 15 years? They found a new leader and asked her not to come back. Their friends abandoned them one by one. People who'd attended their dinner parties and praised their parenting now crossed the street to avoid them. Their perfect house, the one they'd used as a showcase of their success, became a symbol of their shame. Pastor John issued a public apology from the pulpit the following Sunday. I was wrong, he said, his voice heavy with regret. I allowed my longtime friendship with the Mitchells to blind me to the truth. I failed to protect a child in my congregation. I failed to support a mother who was crying out for help. For that, I am deeply sorry. He stepped down as senior pastor the following month. The criminal trial took 6 months to get to court. In the meantime, Jessica's guest room became our permanent home. She refused to let me pay rent. You saved every tip for 3 years trying to get out, she said. I'm not taking money from you now. Instead, I focused on rebuilding our lives. I kept working at the restaurant, but now the money I earned went toward therapy for Leo and paying down my debt little by little. I started going back to therapy myself, working through years of conditioning and abuse. And Leo started healing. The nightmares became less frequent. He stopped wetting the bed entirely. His smile came back, tentative at first, then genuine and bright. He made friends at his new school. He laughed. He played. He was becoming the child he should have always been allowed to be. One afternoon, about 4 months after the custody hearing, Leo and I were sitting on Jessica's tiny balcony. He was drawing, as he often did now, his therapist's idea for processing emotions. But this picture was different from the dark, scary ones he'd drawn in the early days. This one showed 2 stick figures, one big and one small, holding hands under a bright yellow sun. "That's us, Mommy," he said, pointing at the figures. "We're happy now." I pulled him into my lap and held him tight. "Yes, baby, we are happy now." The trial finally arrived in November. The prosecution had an overwhelming case. The video evidence, Dr. Martinez's testimony, the documented injuries, Leo's own statements, all of it painted an undeniable picture of systematic abuse. My parents' defense tried to argue that they'd been using outdated but well-intentioned discipline methods, that they'd truly believed they were helping, that they'd never meant to cause real harm. The jury didn't buy it. After only 4 hours of deliberation, they returned with guilty verdicts on all counts. The sentencing hearing was 2 weeks later. Richard and Eleanor stood before the judge, no longer the proud, perfect couple they'd pretended to be. They looked small and old and defeated. "Do you have anything to say before I pass sentence?" the judge asked. Eleanor spoke first, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I thought we were helping." Richard said nothing. Even then, even after everything, he couldn't admit he'd been wrong. The judge showed no mercy. "You systematically abused a vulnerable child who trusted you. You prioritized control and your own egos over the well-being of your grandson. You showed no remorse until you were caught. Richard Mitchell, you are sentenced to 3 years in prison followed by 5 years probation. Eleanor Mitchell, you are sentenced to 2 years in prison followed by 5 years probation. Upon release, you will both be required to complete anger management and parenting courses, though I doubt you'll ever be trusted around children again." 3 years for Richard. 2 for Eleanor. It wasn't enough. Not really. Not for what they'd done. But it was something. It was justice, imperfect as it may be. I didn't attend the sentencing in person. I didn't need to see them one more time. Maria called me afterward with the results, and I simply nodded and said, "Thank you." That evening, Leo asked me a question he hadn't asked in months. "Mommy, are Grandma and Grandpa ever coming back?" I knelt down to his eye level and took his hands. "No, sweetheart. They can't come near us anymore. The judge said so. You're safe." "Good," he said simply. "Then, can we have mac and cheese for dinner?" Just like that, he moved on. Children are remarkably resilient when they're finally given the chance to heal. The months turned into years. Jessica finally did start charging me rent, but only after I'd paid off half my debt and gotten a promotion to shift manager at the restaurant. Leo thrived in school. He joined soccer, made friends, and slowly but surely left the trauma behind. I heard through the grapevine that my parents had sold their perfect house to pay legal fees. After their release from prison, they moved to a small apartment in another town, far from the community where they'd once been respected. They lived quietly, keeping to themselves, 2 broken people reaping what they'd sown. I didn't forgive them. Maybe someday I would, but that day hasn't come yet. Forgiveness isn't something you owe your abusers. It's something you give yourself when you're ready, and I'm not ready. What I did do was build a new life. 3 years after that horrible night when I carried Leo out of that house, I'd paid off my debt completely, every last dollar. The weight that had been crushing me for so long was finally gone. Jessica and I found a small 2-bedroom apartment nearby. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Leo had his own room, painted blue at his request, with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. I had a small balcony where I started growing herbs and vegetables. We were poor, but we were free. One Saturday morning, Leo and I were at the farmer's market buying tomato plants for the balcony when he turned to me with a serious expression. "Mommy, I'm glad you took me away that night." I stopped walking and knelt down to look at him. He was 9 now, taller and stronger, with Marcus's kind eyes and my stubborn chin. I'm glad too, sweetheart. It was the scariest thing I've ever done, but also the most important. I know I was really sad and scared for a while. He continued, choosing his words carefully the way his therapist had taught him. But now I'm okay, and you're okay too. We're a good team. The best team, I agreed, pulling him into a hug. As we walked home with our plants, Leo chattering about where we should put them and how tall they'd grow, I thought about how far we'd come. From that dark bedroom, with its hidden camera recording horrors, to this sunny street with its promise of growth, it hadn't been easy. There had been days I'd wanted to give up, nights I'd sobbed into my pillow, wondering if I'd made the right choice, moments I'd been so scared I could barely breathe. But every single second of struggle had been worth it to see my son smile, to hear him laugh, to watch him grow into himself without fear. That afternoon, we planted the tomatoes together on our little balcony. Leo carefully patted soil around each plant while I held them steady. "Mom?" he said as we worked. "These are going to grow really big and strong, aren't they?" "They are, baby. Just like us." I smiled, tears pricking my eyes. Just like us. And as I watched him water the plants with fierce concentration, I realized something important. I'd spent so many years thinking I needed my parents' approval, their support, their validation. I'd thought I couldn't survive without them. But I had survived. We both had. And we'd done more than survive. We'd learned to thrive. The scars would always be there, both mine and Leo's. The trauma didn't just disappear because we'd escaped. But every day, we worked on healing. Every day, we chose safety and love over control and fear. Every day, we built something better. Looking back now, I can see that night for what it truly was. Not just the worst night of my life, but also the first night of our freedom. The night I finally became the mother Leo deserved. The night I stopped being Richard and Eleanor Mitchell's obedient daughter and became my own person. It took losing everything to realize I didn't need what they offered. Their money came with chains. Their help came with conditions. Their love came with a price that was far too high. Real love doesn't leave bruises. Real love doesn't require perfection. Real love doesn't make you feel small and afraid. Real love looks like a 6-year-old boy sleeping peacefully without nightmares. Like a balcony full of plants growing toward the sun. Like the freedom to make mistakes and still be worthy. Like choosing courage over comfort, even when comfort seems easier. To anyone reading this who feels trapped the way I was, please know that you deserve better. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve relationships that build you up instead of tearing you down. And you have the strength to leave, even when it feels impossible. It won't be easy. There will be days you doubt yourself, days you're terrified, days you wonder if you made the right choice. But on the other side of that fear is freedom. On the other side of that struggle is peace. On the other side of that darkness is light. You are stronger than you know. You are worth more than they've told you, and you absolutely can build a life on your own terms. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have left sooner, or would fear have kept you there longer? Drop a comment and let me know your thoughts. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. Your support means everything and helps me keep sharing these important experiences. Thank you for listening.